The morning began, as always, with the annoying ring of the alarm clock and a sense of emptiness. Clara opened her eyes, not immediately sure where she was. Light fell through the blinds in stripes on the white wall, and everything looked the same as yesterday and the day before and 100 days ago. A one-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor, the smell of coffee from other balconies, the distant hum of cars outside the windows. She slowly got out of bed, unhurried. The alarm had long since stopped, but its ringing seemed to still hang in the air. The same persistent feeling of emptiness that hadn't left her for several years. Clara was 27. Work, office, numbers, reports. A team where no one talks about anything real. A boss with a cold gaze and polite weariness. A salary, enough to live on, but life, it felt, was passing her by. It seemed she existed as if behind glass. She saw, heard, breathed, but didn't feel. On the subway, she often caught herself looking not at people, but at reflections in the windows. Sometimes these reflections changed. Instead of her own figure, someone else's, a woman in a black dress with a hairstyle from the early 19th century. A face, as if hers, but not hers. Then it was gone. Subway, crowd, advertising, dizziness. Clara didn't tell anyone about this. Not her friends, not the psychotherapist she quit after the second session. She didn't believe anyone would understand. She had always been drawn to the old streets. On weekends, she could wander for hours through the city center, where 19th century facades were preserved. Stone under her feet, windows with peeling paint, doors with worn brass handles. Sometimes it seemed to her that she had been here before. Not just been, like we all are somewhere, but actually lived. Knew the smells of these streets, the sounds, the voices. Could almost with her eyes closed remember which turn led to the pharmacy, where the bakery door creaked, how it smelled in the house with columns. Sometimes she had dreams. In them, she walked along streets that didn't exist, on cobblestones where hooves clattered. She inhaled the cold air that smelled of smoke. In her dream, people dressed differently. Cloaks, top hats, gloves. They talked to her, called her by a name that disappeared as soon as she woke up. But the faces were too familiar. Like old photographs she had long forgotten, but somehow immediately recognized. Every morning after such dreams, Clara woke up with a lump in her throat. She wasn't scared, it was painful, as if the part of her that knew why she was living had stayed in another time. At work, Clara caught herself operating on autopilot. She mechanically entered numbers, checked boxes, answered yes, understood, when asked to recalculate a table. The world was losing focus. Old music played in her headphones, most often romances or slow piano pieces. Her contemporaries listened to new releases, but she found comfort in sounds that seemed to remember another time. She tried various hobbies, drawing, writing, yoga. Nothing helped. Life remained like a faded photograph, with an image but without color. She didn't know how to rejoice in small things, and she didn't know how to forget. although she didn't know what exactly she should forget. A friend once joked, "Clara, you have the depression of a Russian noblewoman, just without the estate." Clara smiled but didn't answer, because it felt like the truth. The more days passed, the stronger the longing grew inside her, not for someone, but for a time. As if she had missed a train that was supposed to take her home. But where that home was, she didn't know. Evening descended on the city like a heavy blanket of gray streets and yellow streetlights. Clara walked along the sidewalk, seemingly endlessly stepping over puddles and potholes in the asphalt. Her phone buzzed in her ears, empty notifications from a colleague, clumsy requests to finish the report ahead of schedule. Another minute, and she would finally forget about work. Another moment, and sleep would come, where everything would be different. At the bus stop, the display lit up. Bus number and route, a familiar sight. Clara looked up. Number 42, Financial Center, North Station. Good. She would doze off on the way, and at home, she would stitch together some pleasure, a hot shower, an old record with a piano romance, and half an hour of doing nothing. The bus stopped, and Clara stepped inside. A row of seats, dim light, the smell of dust and tea. The cabin hadn't been aired out after the previous trip. She chose a window seat, facing where the street lights and the shoes of passers-by flickered outside. The driver silently nodded to her in the mirror. Behind the glass, his eyes seemed too light, almost colorless, and the circles under his brows looked like bruises. The doors closed, the engine purred, and the bus moved. Clara stretched her legs, found her headphones in her bag, and turned on her phone. But instead of the usual player, a warning popped up on the screen: "Cannot play file." She turned off the device and put it in her pocket. The light dimmed, and the passengers' conversations faded into the distance. After a couple of minutes, the route changed. Usually, the bus would turn right onto Dolorkovsky Street, but it went straight towards the old tunnel under the railway. Clara frowned. This section had long been closed to cars. She got up to look at the display in the cabin. It showed unfamiliar stops with names like Shoemaker Street, Falcon Square, Tram Ring. No route number, no indication of the final destination. The bus passed through the tunnel, and the scenery outside the window changed. The houses along the streets became taller, but their paint was peeling as after heavy rain. Streetlights hung on high, wrought iron supports, curved like beaks. Clara pressed against the glass. No one was around. No cars, no people. Only flickering windows and an ancient cobblestone sidewalk, like a 19th century pavement. The passengers were silent. Clara turned around. A man in a wide black coat, a woman in a hat with a veil, a teenager with a book in his hands. All were looking forward, not noticing that the world around them had changed. She touched the handrail. The metal felt colder than usual, and a cold shiver seemed to run down it. The bus stopped. Outside the window, a display glowed. 13th stop. It flickered as if gasping for breath, and in its light, the reflections in the windshield strangely vibrated. Clara suddenly felt a heaviness in her chest, as if someone had grabbed her heart. The driver turned his head towards her, his eyes fixed on the mirror. His voice sounded even and indifferent. "You've been here before." Clara tightened her grip on her bag strap. Her heart beat faster, and one question danced in her head. Where am I? But it only registered as a faint echo because the passengers were silent, as if nothing had happened. She glanced at the driver, at the illuminated display, and tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. "Excuse me," she finally exhaled. "Where are we going?" The driver quietly nodded again and turned back to the road, while the bus slowly opened its doors. Clara stood up, feeling the floor tremble beneath her feet, like the breathing of an underground monster. She took a step outside and heard the quiet scraping of the thresholds and the clatter of hooves. Behind her, the doors were closing. She didn't want to turn around, but she couldn't resist, and saw in the mirror as the bus, hunching, disappeared into the haze of the night fog. Before her was a street bathed in the warm light of lanterns. The wind carried the scent of damp stone and old firewood. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. It seemed to her that someone called her name, but the voice was too far away. She took a few steps forward, leaving tiny footprints on the cobblestone pavement. A strange, unsettling feeling suggested this was only the beginning of the journey, and she walked towards where there were no roads home, but there was memory enclosed in every stone and every glance. The hum of the bus faded, and the world froze in an anxious silence. Clara stood on the cobblestone pavement. Around her the fog slowly billowed, thick and damp, like steam in a bathroom after a long shower. The light of the lanterns was dim, yellow as from kerosene lamps. It cast long shadows, making the street look like a theatrical set, too perfect, too familiar. She took a step forward. The heels of her boots, simple, modern ones, clunked dully on the cobblestones, out of sync with the sounds of this world. Around her were houses with high ceilings, narrow windows, and carved balconies. Walls of old brick, faded signs with street names. The names were old-fashioned: Alexander Street, Provincial Library, Apothecary Lane. But what struck Clara most was not this. She knew these streets, not from guidebooks, not from books. She knew that if she turned right now, she would reach a quiet embankment with a cast iron railing and lanterns, where it smelled of river and fish. If she went further, she would see an old pharmacy, behind which was a bakery with cinnamon and milk. She remembered the creak of the bread shop door, the jingle of the bell at the entrance. Her fingers would find the way themselves, even if she were blindfolded. Clara slowly walked forward. At the intersection, a man in his 50s, in a long coat and with a cane, approached her. He politely tipped his hat. "Good evening, Elena Nikolaevna. May I escort you?" Clara froze. The words seemed to pass right through her. "Excuse me, what did you call me?" The man looked at her with surprise, but not disbelief. "Elena Nikolaevna, you seem out of sorts today. "Is everything all right?" She didn't answer, just nodded. His face seemed familiar. He was like someone from a dream, from an old photograph. His voice was the same as she had heard it then. When? She didn't know. But she knew she had heard it before. They walked together, past signs for Taylor Zakharov, Salty Cobb Manufactory, photographer Gruber. In the shop windows were long dresses on mannequins, pocket watches on chains, books in leather bindings. All the passers-by were strangely dressed. Women in hats and gloves, men in suits, and no one was holding a phone. Children played with hoops, not smartphones. When Clara stopped to catch her breath, a young woman, about 20, approached her. "Elena Nikolaevna, we are expecting you in the music room today. Surely you haven't forgotten?" Clara's lips trembled. "Excuse me, who are you?" "Varvara Andreevna," she laughed. "Good heavens, you really are tired. Rest, dear, don't take on so much." She walked away, leaving Clara alone. Again, the name. Again, recognition. They all knew her, and no one asked unnecessary questions. No one was surprised that she was confused, silent, that her clothes were not from their time. On the contrary, it was as if everything was in its place and everything was as it should be. Clara stopped at a shop window. Inside was a mirror, old, with a darkened frame. She looked into it and froze for a moment. In the reflection was her, but slightly different. Her hair was a little longer, darker. The dress was high-necked. In her ears were earrings she had never owned. But the face was hers. A little softer, a little older. As if for a moment she saw who she had been here. And at that moment, something clicked inside. She wasn't scared. There was no panic. There was a feeling of returning. She walked further, towards the house with columns, with wrought iron railings. Not knowing why, but knowing it was home, she went up the steps, and before she could knock, the door swung open by itself. A woman stood on the threshold, gray-haired, in an old cap. "Good heavens, my child, you've returned." And for the first time, Clara didn't ask who she was, because she felt it. She knew her. Like a beloved nanny she had lost in childhood. "You promised to be here for dinner," the woman said, "and the soup is getting cold, and the doctor has already returned from his appointments." Clara whispered, "Doctor," and stepped inside. The house greeted her with silence and the smell of wax. The creak of floorboards, the click of the door closing behind her, the soft light of lamps under lampshades. Walls in muted beige tones, paintings in dark frames, landscapes and portraits. Everything was like a dream, and yet so achingly familiar that Clara's throat tightened. The woman in the cap, nanny, housekeeper, took her coat without asking questions. "Your study is open. Would you like to go there, Elena Nikolaevna?" "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, please." She didn't know why she agreed. She just knew where this study was. Her legs led her there, as if following the traces of a past life. A door with frosted glass, a round handle, behind it, a spacious room with a writing desk, a piano, and bookshelves. On the desk, an inkwell, a quill, a slim notebook. Everything was exactly where it should be. No different. Clara slowly lowered herself into the armchair. For a second, she closed her eyes and saw a flash. The room, the same. Only the window was bright. The barking of dogs and the ringing of bells could be heard. She was sitting at the same desk, but in a different body, in a high-waisted dress, her hair styled in a tight updo. Her fingers were sketching something in the notebook. Footsteps could be heard outside the door. "Lenotchka," a man's voice said, "I need your help." And then darkness again. She opened her eyes. Her heart was pounding as if after waking from a troubled dream. Everything was silent. Only her breathing. Only the beating inside her chest. She stood up, approached the piano, ran her fingers over the keys, and suddenly played a short passage from an old romance. Her fingers remembered. Her brain did not. "I can't play," she whispered into the emptiness. "I can't." But the piano responded, and in its sounds was the voice of her past. Someone knocked on the door. She wasn't scared. A man in a white coat, wearing glasses with a kind face. His hair was slightly wavy with gray at the temples. He smiled. "You look tired, Lena. Did you have a difficult day?" Clara was numb. She knew him. Every feature of his face. That voice. That warmth. Familiar down to her bones. But she didn't know from where. He approached, gently touched her shoulder. "What's wrong? Who are you?" She barely breathed. He froze. "Nonsense," he said almost in a whisper. "Are you all right? Is it happening again?" He didn't finish. He just sat down beside her, took her hand. "I'm here. Don't be afraid." And then the second, more vivid memory came. She in the same house. It's burning. Smoke everywhere. The crackling of flames. She's screaming, "Where is he? Where is he?" Someone is pulling her, dragging her away. In her hands is a small jacket, and she herself is barefoot in a nightgown, crying, screaming. Fire, screams, crackling, a dry cough, a man's voice. "You have to get out. You'll save him another time, Lena." And she runs, stumbling, falling down the stairs. But in her back, a feeling something is unfinished. A deep breath, and back to the room. Clara heavily stood up, slipped out from under the doctor's hand. That was... She tried to compose herself. A fire. I didn't save someone." He froze, looked at her for a long time without looking away. "You remembered?" "No, not everything. But I saw a boy, and I didn't save him. I ran away. I was scared." And at that moment, for the first time, her heart beat for real. She remembered the eyes. Childish, frightened, eyes that looked at her through the smoke. And she knew, too well, even in this life. She recoiled, grabbed the edge of the table. "That it's him. It was him." The man was silent. She exhaled. "That was my father." The doctor stood up, carefully, almost with a bow. "Sometimes we return to where we didn't manage to finish something." "What does that mean?" "It means you're here for a reason, Elena. And not for the first time." Clara covered her face with her hands. Everything was swirling in her head. Fire. Boy. Doctor. and him her father. Only then he was a little boy she hadn't saved. So now she had returned to understand why, and perhaps to do things differently. Clara sat by the window in the old room and watched the fog settle over the street. The world around her was quiet, as if cut out from another era. Everything here was beautiful, logical, covered by a soft veil of the past. And yet, a strange unease grew within her. This wasn't her time, not her life, but not entirely foreign either. With each hour, the memories became clearer. The name Elena Nikolaevna no longer caused surprise. People approached her, neighbors, servants, children from the street, and spoke with such warmth, such trust, as if they had known her all their lives.